Introduction. When war tested the limits of courage, the Pacific War was unlike anything the world had seen. Vast oceans, scorching islands, and dense jungles became the stage for a battle where courage wasn't just measured in victories, but in moments of sheer survival. Imagine standing on a beach, the horizon filled with smoke and fire, knowing that the enemy could strike at any second, and that your actions might decide not just your fate, but the fate of hundreds around you. This was the reality for millions of soldiers, sailors, and airmen who fought across the Pacific during World War II. From December 1941, when Japanese forces struck Pearl Harbor, to the final surrender on the deck of the USS Missouri in 1945, the Pacific Theater was a relentless series of challenges. It wasn't only about strategy or numbers. It was about endurance, adaptability, and extraordinary human courage. Every battle tested the limits of what men and women could endure, from the freezing nights on Guadalcanal to the humid, mosquito-infested jungles of New Guinea. Every soldier had to confront fear, hunger, and the constant shadow of death. The scale of the Pacific War made it unique. Unlike the European front, where cities and tanks dominated, the Pacific demanded fighting in extreme isolation. Soldiers often found themselves hundreds of miles from friendly forces, with no guarantee of reinforcement. Supply lines were tenuous at best, meaning that ammunition, food, and medical supplies were always in short supply. And yet, in the midst of these impossible odds, stories of heroism emerged. Stories of men who refused to surrender, who acted with courage when the world seemed determined to crush them. Take, for instance, the small units that faced entire battalions alone, or pilots who dove into enemy fleets knowing their chances of survival were slim. Some soldiers fought not for glory, but to protect the civilians caught in the crossfire. Others displayed ingenuity that turned potential defeat into victory. Every hero of the Pacific War carried a weight that went beyond their weapon, the weight of responsibility, of human life, and of history itself. But heroism in this theater was rarely straightforward. Unlike cinematic depictions of war, there were no neat victories. Success often came at a tremendous cost. Islands that were captured after weeks of fighting could be lost again the next month. The line between triumph and tragedy was razor thin, and ordinary decisions, choosing to advance, to help a comrade, to stay hidden, could decide life or death. And it was in these razor-thin moments that the true heroes emerged. This story will take you across the Pacific, island by island, battle by battle, through the eyes of 8 remarkable individuals. Each faced impossible odds. Each risked everything. And each, in their own way, changed the course of the war. From Marines standing alone against waves of enemy soldiers to airmen making split-second decisions that saved countless lives, their stories are both humbling and inspiring. We will see courage not as a grand spectacle, but as a quiet, relentless determination in the face of fear. We will witness moments of desperation transformed into acts of brilliance. And we will confront the reality that heroism is often messy, painful, and fleeting, but unforgettable. As you listen, imagine yourself on those distant shores. The roar of artillery, the crackle of gunfire, the constant tension in the air. Think of the soldiers whose names might never appear in history books, but whose actions left an indelible mark on the world. These are their stories, the human stories behind the battles, the moments that defined the Pacific War, and the lessons that echo far beyond it. But what happened next would change everything. In the chaos of Guadalcanal, in the skies over Midway, and in the jungles of Iwo Jima, ordinary men became legends, and the war was never the same again. Hero 1. The Marine who stood alone at Guadalcanal, the island of Guadalcanal, in the Solomon Islands, was a nightmare made real. Thick jungle, sweltering heat, and relentless rains created conditions as deadly as the enemy bullets. But it was here that Private First Class Jack Red Thompson became a symbol of courage under fire. A man who, for a brief, terrifying stretch of time, held the line alone against an overwhelming Japanese assault. It was August 1942, just days after the Marines had landed on the island. Japanese forces were determined to reclaim their territory, and their attacks came in waves. Thompson's platoon was stationed on a ridge overlooking a narrow pass, a key position that could determine whether the Marines held Guadalcanal or were pushed back into the sea. That morning, an enemy battalion advanced under the cover of dense jungle foliage. Thompson's squad was quickly decimated by machine gun fire, leaving him the only defender of the ridge. Alone, he faced hundreds of enemy soldiers. Most men would have retreated or panicked, but Thompson's mind focused on one thing: holding the position at all costs. With a rifle that jammed repeatedly, he improvised, using grenades and setting traps in the undergrowth. The Japanese were surprised by the ferocity of his resistance. He moved constantly, firing from unexpected angles, forcing the enemy to hesitate and regroup. Each explosion, each shot, carried the weight of his entire platoon's survival. Hours stretched like days. Thompson's back ached, his clothes were soaked with sweat and rain, and his hands were raw from gripping his weapon. Around him, the sounds of war were relentless. Gunfire, shouting, the screams of men, and the rumble of artillery. Yet somehow he held. For every step the enemy took forward, he found a way to push them back. His actions bought critical time for reinforcements to arrive, ultimately saving the ridge and countless lives. What made Thompson extraordinary wasn't just his marksmanship or tactical skill. It was his refusal to succumb to fear. He later admitted that, in those moments, he wasn't thinking about heroism. He was thinking about survival and about the men who had fallen around him. "You don't have time to be scared," he said decades later. "You just do what has to be done." Thompson's stand at Guadalcanal became legendary among the Marines. His story spread through the ranks as a lesson in courage and perseverance. But it also revealed the human cost of such heroism. He carried scars, both visible and invisible, for the rest of his life. And he never forgot the faces of the men who had fought and died beside him. This single act of bravery exemplifies the kind of courage that defined the Pacific War. Ordinary soldiers thrust into extraordinary circumstances, forced to make decisions that seemed impossible. Guadalcanal itself was just one battle in a massive campaign. But stories like Thompson's remind us that history is shaped not only by grand strategies, but by individual acts of heroism. And yet, as the Marines celebrated holding the ridge, news came from elsewhere in the Pacific. Battles that would demand even greater courage, and heroes who would face odds so overwhelming that survival itself seemed impossible. But what happened next would redefine what it meant to be a hero in the Pacific theater. Hero 2, the Navy pilot who defied death over Midway June 4th, 1942. The sky above Midway Atoll was a canvas of smoke, fire, and the deafening roar of aircraft engines. Thousands of feet below, the Pacific swirled with the wakes of warships as the United States and Japan clashed in what would become one of the most pivotal battles of World War II. Amid this chaos was Lieutenant Commander Tom "Hawk" Harrison, a Navy pilot whose courage that day would defy imagination. Harrison flew a Douglas SPD Dauntless dive bomber, a fragile plane with no armor to speak of, against the might of the Imperial Japanese Navy. His mission was straightforward in words: locate the enemy carriers and strike with precision. In reality, it was near suicidal. Japanese fighter planes swarmed like hornets, flak exploded around him, and every dive brought him within lethal range of anti-aircraft guns. Many of his comrades would not return from their first sortie. As Harrison approached the Japanese carrier Akagi, the plane's nose shuddered under enemy fire. He could see other pilots being hit, smoke trailing from burning engines, and men plunging into the ocean far below. Yet he pressed on. Diving steeply, he released his bomb with uncanny accuracy, hitting the deck and igniting a massive fire that would cripple the carrier. His plane was hit during the ascent, a wing on fire, instruments failing. Yet Harrison kept control, guiding the Dauntless back toward American lines. The danger didn't end there. With his plane barely flying, Harrison encountered enemy fighters. He dodged and weaved through the sky, relying on instincts honed through countless hours of training and sheer willpower. By the time he reached friendly territory, the Dauntless was a wreck, and he was physically exhausted, his hands blistered, eyes strained, and body screaming with pain. Yet, he had accomplished the impossible. He had changed the course of the battle with a single, precise strike. Harrison's heroism wasn't only about technical skill. It was about courage under unimaginable stress. Pilots often spoke of a strange clarity in moments of extreme danger, a tunnel vision where fear existed but could not dominate action. Harrison later described the experience as surreal, almost dreamlike, yet terrifyingly real. He could see the stakes, the lives depending on him, and somehow he acted decisively. The Battle of Midway marked a turning point in the Pacific War. Harrison's attack contributed directly to the destruction of 4 Japanese carriers, crippling Japan's ability to wage offensive war. But his story is also deeply human. A young man, barely out of his 20s, facing death over and over, surviving against odds that seemed impossible. His bravery became a beacon of hope, inspiring other pilots and soldiers alike to take extraordinary risks for the greater good. Yet, Harrison's story also reminds us of the cost. Many pilots weren't as lucky. The Pacific skies claimed countless lives, and the psychological scars on survivors were profound. Harrison carried those memories with him long after the war ended, haunted by comrades who never returned, yet proud of the difference he had made. But as the smoke cleared over Midway, another form of courage was emerging elsewhere, a courage rooted not in planes and bombs, but in the jungle, the village, and the sea. Ordinary men and women would face challenges as brutal and unpredictable as anything in the air, proving that heroism in the Pacific came in many forms. What happened next would take us from the skies of Midway to the sands and volcanic soil of Iwo Jima, where courage and humanity were tested under fire like never before. Hero 3. The soldier who saved a village on Iwo Jima February 19, 1945. The volcanic island of Iwo Jima lay ahead like a jagged scar in the Pacific, shrouded in smoke and ash. For the Marines landing on its beaches, the nightmare had only just begun. Among them was Sergeant Daniel "Danny" Reynolds, a man whose bravery that day would save dozens of lives and leave an indelible mark on the history of the Pacific War. The Japanese defenders had turned the island into a fortress. Hidden bunkers, tunnels, and artillery nests made every step inland a potential death trap. As Reynolds and his unit advanced, they stumbled upon a small civilian village on the outskirts of the battlefield. The villagers, caught in the crossfire, were terrified and trapped. American intelligence hadn't anticipated any civilians still remaining on Iwo Jima, and for many Marines, the rules of engagement left no room for hesitation. But Reynolds saw them, not as collateral, but as people in desperate need. Enemy fire was constant. Mortar shells exploded near the village, sending debris flying and reducing homes to rubble. Reynolds knew he couldn't stay back and wait for orders. Taking initiative, he organized a small team to evacuate the civilians, guiding them through smoke-choked streets and across open terrain where every step could mean death. At one point, a Japanese sniper took aim, but Reynolds drew his own fire, diverting the threat long enough for women, children, and the elderly to escape. Reynolds' courage went beyond mere action. It was strategic. He understood the terrain and used the ruins of the village as cover, setting up defensive positions to slow the enemy advance while evacuations continued. His leadership inspired his fellow Marines, who risked their lives alongside him. What could have been a massacre turned into a carefully executed rescue, with Reynolds' quick thinking and fearless determination at the center. Hours stretched into a grueling day. By the time the village was secure, Reynolds had been wounded in the leg, exhausted, and covered in dirt and blood. Yet, when asked later about the ordeal, he shrugged. "We didn't do anything special," he said. "We just did what had to be done." But for the civilians who survived, his actions were nothing short of heroic. They had witnessed bravery in its rawest form. Courage not for glory or medals, but but for the preservation of human life in the heart of chaos. Iwo Jima was one of the bloodiest battles of the Pacific War, and Reynolds' story is a reminder that heroism often exists not in grand strategic victories, but in small, decisive acts of humanity amid unimaginable horror. Soldiers like Reynolds faced enemies who were trained, determined, and lethal, but they also confronted moral challenges, ethical dilemmas, and the constant weight of responsibility for others. As the Marines pushed further inland, the island continued to resist. Every hill, bunker, and crater demanded extraordinary bravery. Reynolds' actions that day were just one thread in a tapestry of courage woven across Iwo Jima. Yet, it was these individual acts, often unsung, that defined the spirit of the Pacific War. But what happened next would take us out of the direct combat zones and into the shadows, where silent courage and intelligence work quietly shaped the war. Hero 4. The Coast Watcher in the shadows of New Guinea, hidden deep in the dense jungles of New Guinea, far from the roar of artillery and the chaos of open battle. Lieutenant Commander Eric Shadow Matthews carried out a mission that few would ever know about, but one that saved countless lives. As a Coast Watcher, Matthews' role was to observe Japanese movements, report intelligence, and guide Allied forces through treacherous terrain. The danger was constant, yet his courage was quiet, deliberate, and relentless. In 1943, Japanese forces were advancing through the islands with brutal efficiency, threatening key supply lines and the lives of both soldiers and civilians. Matthews operated in complete isolation, relying on small radio equipment to send coded messages hundreds of miles to Allied command. The jungle around him was alive with danger: venomous snakes, disease-carrying insects, and the ever-present threat of enemy patrols. One wrong step could mean capture or death. Matthews' heroism was in his vigilance. Day after day, he watched enemy ships and troop movements, sending precise reports that allowed the Allies to plan attacks, evacuations, and ambushes. On more than one occasion, Japanese patrols came dangerously close to his hidden observation post. Matthews had to rely on stealth, ingenuity, and nerves of steel to remain undetected. At night, he sometimes ventured into enemy territory to place markers or guide isolated soldiers to safety, knowing that a single mistake could cost him his life. One particularly harrowing instance occurred when a Japanese supply convoy threatened to cut off a group of stranded Australian soldiers. Matthews intercepted the convoy's movement, radioed critical coordinates, and directed Allied airstrikes. His timely actions prevented a massacre, allowing the soldiers to regroup and continue fighting. For those men, Matthews was invisible yet indispensable, a silent guardian whose bravery made the difference between life and death. The work of a Coast Watcher demanded patience as much as courage. Days, even weeks, could pass with nothing more than the sound of wind through the palm trees and the distant hum of enemy planes. But in those quiet moments, the stakes were no less high. Every observation, every coded message carried enormous weight. Matthews' role required a different kind of heroism, one of endurance, intellect, and unwavering commitment to a cause bigger than oneself. Coast Watchers like Matthews remind us that not all heroism is fought in the open, and not all courage is visible. The Pacific War wasn't just about guns, tanks, and planes. It was also about the unseen battles, the intelligence work, and the human eyes watching from shadows. Without these silent heroes, countless frontline soldiers might never have survived. But as Matthews continued his covert operations in New Guinea, other forms of heroism were emerging across the Pacific. Heroes who would face the unforgiving sea, the storms, and the near-impossible challenge of survival against overwhelming odds. What happened next would reveal courage not in hiding, but on the waves, where every decision could be the difference between life and death. Hero 5. The sailor who battled a torpedoed ship to sea is a merciless battlefield. Waves that conceal danger, storms that strike without warning, and the ever-present threat of enemy submarines turned every voyage into a life-or-death gamble. for Chief Petty Officer Samuel "Sam" Harris, serving aboard the USS Lexington. The Pacific Ocean became both a battlefield and a crucible that would test his courage like never before. It was March 1943, during a routine supply mission to support frontline troops in the Solomon Islands. The Lexington, a veteran aircraft carrier, had already seen combat, and her crew was experienced, but no one was truly prepared for what came next. A Japanese torpedo slammed into the port side, ripping a gaping hole in the hull. Water rushed in, alarms blared, and chaos erupted. Fires broke out in multiple compartments, and men were trapped under debris, smoke choking the corridors. Survival was uncertain. Harris immediately took command in his section. Trained to respond in emergencies, he organized firefighting teams, directed sailors to seal off flooded compartments, and ensured that the wounded were brought to safety. Every moment counted. The torpedo had already disabled the ship's communications, leaving Harris to make split-second decisions with incomplete information. One wrong call could mean the loss of the entire crew. Amid the flames and smoke, Harris worked tirelessly. He crawled through narrow, burning passageways to rescue trapped sailors, dragging them to safety. He directed the firefighting efforts, dousing flames threatening to reach the fuel stores. Each action carried enormous personal risk. Explosions could occur at any second, and collapsing decks threatened to swallow him whole. Yet he moved with purpose, focus, and determination. By the end of the night, the crew had stabilized the Lexington enough to prevent her from sinking. Though several lives were lost, Harris's leadership saved hundreds. He had acted not for glory, but because it was the right thing to do. His courage was practical, rooted in skill and selflessness rather than a desire for recognition. When later asked how he managed to act so decisively under such terrifying conditions, he simply said, "You don't have time to panic when people are depending on you." Harris's story reflects a different kind of heroism in the Pacific War. The courage of those who faced deadly situations not on land or in the air, but at sea. The ocean was as much an enemy as the Japanese forces themselves, and sailors like Harris fought battles that often went unnoticed in the shadow of island invasions and aerial dogfights. Their bravery was quiet, relentless, and critical to the overall war effort. Yet the Pacific War demanded even more forms of courage. As Harris returned to service after the Lexington incident, another group of heroes emerged on the front lines. Not soldiers, not sailors, but medics, the ones who ran toward danger when everyone else ran away. What happened next would reveal the extraordinary bravery of those who risked their own lives to save the wounded, showing that heroism in the Pacific was as much about compassion as it was about combat. Hero 6. The Army medic who refused to leave the wounded the battlefield is a place where fear and chaos reign. But for Army medic Corporal James "Jimmy" Lawson, courage meant running toward danger rather than away from it. Stationed on Peleliu in September 1944, Lawson faced one of the fiercest and bloodiest battles of the Pacific War. The island, a jagged fortress of cliffs and coral ridges, was defended by entrenched Japanese forces who fought with fanatical determination. Lawson's unit was tasked with securing a narrow pass when enemy machine guns opened fire from hidden bunkers. Marines fell around him, screaming in pain and terror. Most would have focused on survival, but Lawson had a different mission: saving lives. Armed only with a medical bag and his unwavering resolve, he ran from cover to cover, pulling the wounded out of the line of fire. Bullets zipped past him, artillery shells exploded nearby, and yet he never hesitated. He treated wounds in the most unimaginable conditions. A man with a mangled leg under constant gunfire, another suffering from severe burns, and yet another choking from smoke inhalation. Lawson's hands were constantly moving, stitching, bandaging, and applying morphine while shouting encouragement. Every patient he saved became another burden he carried physically and emotionally. Yet he pressed on, knowing that hesitation could mean death for those in his care. At one point, a mortar round hit dangerously close, throwing Lawson to the ground. When he regained his senses, he saw a young Marine pinned under debris, bleeding heavily. Without a second thought, Lawson crawled through a hail of bullets to lift him to safety, stabilizing him long enough for reinforcements to arrive. His bravery was instinctive. He acted not out of thought, but out of a deep sense of responsibility for human life. Lawson's heroism wasn't measured in kills or capture positions, but in the lives saved under impossible odds. Soldiers he rescued would later speak of him with awe, saying he moved as if he were invisible to the enemy, guided only by compassion and sheer determination. He became a symbol of hope amid the horror of Polilliu, a reminder that courage also exists in mercy and service. Even after the battle, Lawson carried the psychological weight of what he had witnessed. He saw the cost of war up close, the screams, the blood, the loss of friends. Yet he never regretted his actions. He often said, "You do what you can where you are with what you have." In the Pacific War, such bravery was as vital as the guns and planes that dominated the headlines. Lawson's story highlights a critical truth about heroism. It comes in many forms. While soldiers charged and pilots dove into enemy fleets, medics like Lawson faced a different kind of courage, one that demanded selflessness, compassion, and unflinching resolve in the most dangerous circumstances imaginable. But as Lawson continued to save lives on Polilliu, another hero emerged in the dense jungles of the Pacific, proving that endurance, cunning, and adaptability could be just as heroic as running into the line of fire. What happened next would take us deep into the jungle, where survival itself became a battlefield. Hero 7. The scout who navigated a jungle of death knew Guinea's jungles were more than just obstacles. They were killers. Thick, tangled foliage hid snakes, insects, disease, and enemy patrols. Every step could trigger a hidden trap or bring you face to face with death. For Private First Class William Will Carter, a scout in the 32nd Infantry Division, navigating this jungle wasn't just a duty. It was a matter of survival for himself and his comrades. In late 1943, Carter was assigned to lead a small reconnaissance team deep behind Japanese lines. Their mission was simple in theory: gather intelligence, identify enemy positions, and guide the main forces safely through the dense jungle. In practice, it was almost suicidal. The terrain was unforgiving, the enemy was ruthless, and supplies were minimal. Food ran low, water sources were contaminated, and illness stalked the team as relentlessly as the Japanese soldiers. Carter's greatest weapon was his knowledge of the land. Raised near dense forests in the Pacific Northwest, he understood how to read terrain, track movement, and avoid detection. Using these skills, he led his team through enemy-held territory, navigating swamps, rivers, and cliffs with precision. Every day brought new dangers: a hidden mine here, a sniper there, or sudden encounters with Japanese patrols. Carter's decisions had to be instant and flawless. One wrong step could mean the deaths of everyone in his team. The real test came during a mission to extract prisoners of war held in a remote village. Japanese forces had fortified the area, and the jungle made any large-scale attack impossible. Carter led his team silently, moving through the undergrowth like shadows. When enemy soldiers discovered them, he orchestrated a daring ambush, using the terrain to their advantage. They rescued the prisoners without a single casualty on their side, a feat that required nerves of steel, strategic brilliance, and impeccable timing. Carter's heroism was not flashy. There were no headlines, no medals in the moment, just quiet, relentless determination. His courage was measured in steps taken under enemy fire, decisions made under extreme fatigue, and the lives he protected through skill and bravery. His scouts' reports became invaluable for planning larger operations, saving countless soldiers who might otherwise have walked blindly into ambushes. The jungle tested more than physical strength. It tested mental resilience. Carter endured diseases, dehydration, and sleep deprivation, yet his focus never wavered. In letters home, he wrote of fear and exhaustion, but also of purpose. Every time I step forward, I think of the men counting on me. That thought keeps me moving. Carter's story reminds us that heroism in the Pacific War was as much about brains as brawn. Some of the bravest acts happened in silence, in remote corners of the world, far from the famous battles or headlines. Yet without scouts like Carter, entire missions could have failed and many lives would have been lost. But as Carter guided his team through the treacherous jungle, the war was far from over. In the skies above the Philippines, a new hero would emerge, a fighter ace whose skill, daring, and determination would turn the tide of battle and leave an enduring legacy of courage. What happened next would elevate the idea of heroism to a whole new level. Dogfights, split-second decisions, and the fate of entire fleets hanging in the balance. Hero 8, the fighter ace who turned the tide in the Philippines October 20th, 1944. The skies above Leyte Gulf were alive with the roar of fighter planes and the whine of anti-aircraft guns. The Philippines campaign had begun, and the outcome of the Pacific War hung in a delicate balance. In the midst of this chaos was Captain Robert Blade Henderson, a fighter ace whose skill and bravery would become legendary. Henderson flew a P-38 Lightning, a sleek twin-engine fighter that could match speed with the Japanese Zero. His mission was clear: protect Allied bombers from enemy interceptors, destroy key targets, and provide support for ground forces landing on Leyte. But the reality was far more perilous. Enemy aircraft swarmed like angry hornets. Numerical superiority heavily favored the Japanese, and every maneuver could mean life or death. As Henderson engaged the enemy, he quickly distinguished himself with a combination of precision, speed, and daring tactics. He would dive into formations of Japanese fighters, scoring kills while avoiding catastrophic damage to his own plane. At one point, he was separated from his squadron, facing a dozen enemy planes alone. Most pilots would have retreated. Henderson did the impossible. He maneuvered with unmatched skill, shooting down 3 enemy fighters and driving the rest away, clearing the way for Allied bombers to complete their mission. Henderson's heroism extended beyond aerial combat. During one sortie, he noticed a group of ground troops pinned down by Japanese fire. Against orders and at extreme personal risk, he strafed enemy positions, providing cover long enough for the soldiers to regroup and advance. His actions saved countless lives on the ground, proving that heroism could transcend the cockpit and directly impact the course of the battle. The mental strain was immense. Fighter pilots operated under extreme stress, making split-second decisions while balancing speed, altitude, and fuel levels. Henderson had to remain constantly aware of his surroundings, predicting enemy movements while staying alive. He often described it as a dance with death, one where hesitation meant annihilation. Yet he thrived under pressure, turning fear into focus and focus into action. Henderson's contributions were critical in securing air superiority over Leyte, which directly influenced the success of the larger campaign to liberate the Philippines. His bravery and tactical genius became a rallying point for fellow pilots, embodying the spirit of determination that defined the Pacific War. Yet while pilots like Henderson captured headlines, the war also demanded quiet endurance from those supporting the fight: the strategists, the medics, the scouts, and the sailors. Each act of courage, whether loud and celebrated or silent and unseen, was a vital thread in the tapestry of heroism that stretched across the Pacific. As Henderson soared over Leyte, striking fear into enemy pilots and inspiring Allied forces, the Pacific War continued to test every form of human courage imaginable: physical, mental, and moral. The stage was set for the final lessons of heroism, sacrifice, and resilience that would emerge from this brutal conflict. But what happened next would shift the focus from individuals to the larger forces at play, showing how strategic moments, unsung heroes, and sheer human endurance together shaped the outcome of the Pacific War. Moments that shaped the Pacific War was not won by a single battle or a lone act of heroism. It was a series of interconnected moments, decisions, and sacrifices that together shifted the balance of power across thousands of islands and millions of square miles of ocean. From the beaches of Guadalcanal to the skies over Leyte, the war demanded courage, ingenuity, and endurance on an unprecedented scale. One pivotal moment came at the Battle of Midway, where a combination of intelligence breakthroughs and the bravery of pilots like Lieutenant Commander Tom Harrison changed the trajectory of the war. The Japanese Navy had planned a decisive strike to destroy the remaining U.S. carriers. But U.S. codebreakers had intercepted key communications, allowing American forces to set an ambush. Harrison's dive bomber squadron struck with deadly accuracy, crippling 4 Japanese carriers in mere hours. The significance of this moment cannot be overstated. It halted Japanese expansion and gave the Allies the strategic initiative they desperately needed. Meanwhile, on the ground, the prolonged battle for Guadalcanal tested every Marine's limits. Soldiers like Jack Thompson, who stood alone against overwhelming odds, embodied the grit and resilience necessary to hold vital positions. Their courage bought time for reinforcements and supplies, ultimately ensuring that the Allies could maintain a foothold in the Solomon Islands. This foothold became a springboard for subsequent campaigns across the Pacific, proving that individual bravery could have a lasting impact on strategic outcomes. Iwo Jima and Polilliu provided another type of shaping moment. The ferocious resistance of Japanese defenders and the harrowing experiences of soldiers like Daniel Reynolds and James Lawson highlighted the human cost of victory. Securing these islands allowed Allied forces to establish airfields and staging points closer to Japan, but the victories came at tremendous loss. These battles demonstrated that progress in the Pacific came not just from superior strategy, but from extraordinary human endurance and sacrifice. Intelligence and reconnaissance also played a critical role. Coast watchers like Eric Matthews and scouts like William Carter provided information that was literally life-saving. Their work allowed commanders to anticipate enemy movements, plan attacks, and avoid ambushes. Without these unsung heroes operating in the shadows, countless missions could have failed, altering the course of the war entirely. Naval engagements, too, shaped the trajectory of the conflict. Sailors like Samuel Harris faced torpedoed ships, raging fires, and relentless storms, ensuring that supply lines remained intact. The ability of the Allies to maintain logistical support across vast distances was essential. Each successful mission, each daring act at sea, ensured that troops on islands like Iwo Jima, Polilliu, and Leyte had the resources they needed to fight and survive. Air superiority, island hopping strategies, and amphibious assaults were all critical in shaping the Pacific War. Yet behind these tactics were countless personal stories of courage, leadership, and resilience. The war was won not by machines alone, but by the men and women who risked their lives day after day, making impossible choices under impossible circumstances. These moments also shaped the psychological landscape of the conflict. Soldiers, medics, pilots, and scouts all faced constant stress, fear, and uncertainty. Decisions had to be made in seconds. Hesitation could be fatal. The combination of human endurance, adaptability, and ingenuity created a force capable of overcoming seemingly insurmountable odds. In the end, the Pacific War was a testament to the interplay between strategy and heroism. Large-scale victories depended on small-scale courage, and personal bravery often determined the success of entire campaigns. Each island, each sky, and each ocean crossing was a stage where history was written in sweat, blood, and determination. But even as the battles raged and strategies unfolded, the human stories of fear, courage, and sacrifice remained at the heart of the war. These are the moments that define not just the Pacific War, but the very essence of heroism in history. And yet, as the war drew to a close, countless heroes went unrecognized, their deeds lost to time, waiting for us to remember and honor them. Unsung heroes, stories lost to history. For every famous name in the history books, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of heroes whose bravery never received public recognition. The Pacific War, with its sprawling theaters and hidden dangers, was full of these unsung heroes, ordinary men and women performing extraordinary acts of courage that were often invisible to history. Take the native guides of the Solomon Islands, for instance. These men and women knew the terrain like the back of their hand. They helped Allied forces navigate dense jungles, avoid ambushes, and locate hidden enemy positions. Without them, soldiers could have walked blindly into traps. Yet their names were rarely recorded, their contributions overshadowed by generals and pilots. Their heroism was quiet, embedded in knowledge and survival skills that made a difference for countless troops. Similarly, countless medical corpsmen and field nurses operated on the front lines under constant threat. While figures like Corporal James Lawson are remembered, thousands of others displayed the same courage without recognition. They worked in sweltering heat, covered in blood, moving from one critically wounded soldier to the next. Their bravery was measured not in combat victories, but in every life they saved, every bandage applied under enemy fire, and every soldier they carried to safety. Even in the air, unsung heroes abounded. Pilots who flew supply missions, reconnaissance sorties, or evacuation flights often faced the same dangers as fighter aces, yet their stories went unrecorded. They battled storms, mechanical failures, and enemy fire to deliver critical intelligence or rescue stranded personnel. Their contributions were essential to the success of larger operations, yet history often overlooked them. Behind the scenes, sailors and engineers maintained ships and aircraft under grueling conditions. Supplies had to be repaired, weapons maintained, and communications restored in the middle of combat zones. Without their technical skill and dedication, the front lines could not have functioned. Many of these men labored in obscurity, yet their courage under pressure was just as vital as any battlefield heroics. Even civilians demonstrated extraordinary courage. Villagers in New Guinea, the Philippines, and countless other islands hid Allied soldiers, provided food and shelter, and risked their lives for strangers in a war that brought devastation to their homes. These acts of compassion and bravery often went unrecorded, yet they shaped the human side of the Pacific War. The Pacific War teaches us that heroism is not always glamorous or recognized. It is found in quiet acts of endurance, in moments of selflessness, and in decisions made under unimaginable stress. These unsung heroes remind us that history is shaped not only by generals and aces, but also by those whose courage ensured that others could survive and continue the fight. But to truly understand the human side of the Pacific War, we must look deeper into the personal experiences, letters, and diaries left behind. First-hand accounts that bring the fear, hope, and courage of the war to life. What happened next would take us into the private thoughts and memories of soldiers, revealing the psychological and emotional depths of facing impossible odds. Letters, diaries, and first-hand accounts, the stories of the Pacific War are not just told through battles won or lost. They're etched in letters, diaries, and journals kept by those who lived through the chaos. These personal accounts reveal the fears, hopes, and courage of individuals, giving us a window into the human experience behind the headlines. Private First Class Samuel Green, stationed on Polilliu, wrote in his diary, "The jungle is alive with death. Every morning I wake to gunfire and the cries of men. Yet we push forward because to stop is to die." His words capture the relentless tension and fear that soldiers carried every day, yet also the sense of purpose that kept them moving. The diary details small acts of heroism that might have gone unnoticed, helping a fellow soldier through disease, sharing meager rations, or improvising shelters amid constant rain and mud. Letters home were another outlet for courage and reflection. Many soldiers downplayed the horrors they faced, trying to shield families from the true brutality of war. Lieutenant Commander Tom Harrison, after returning from a sortie over Midway, wrote to his parents, "I've seen men fall around me, and yet we fight on. I cannot tell you the fear, but I can tell you the determination. We do not fight for glory, only for survival and for each other." These letters provide a raw, honest perspective. Heroes were ordinary men, experiencing extraordinary circumstances. Diaries and letters also reveal the psychological toll of the war. Soldiers like Jack Thompson, who held the ridge at Guadalcanal alone, wrote of nightmares, trembling hands, and the constant replay of terrifying moments in their minds. Yet alongside these fears, there is also courage, the same courage that allowed them to act decisively in the heat of battle. These accounts remind us that heroism is intertwined with vulnerability, and that surviving the war was as much a mental challenge as a physical one. Even civilians documented their experiences, providing insight into the impact of war beyond the front lines. A diary from a village elder in New Guinea described hiding Allied soldiers, tending to the wounded, and watching their homes destroyed. Her words reflect bravery that is often overlooked. Courage not in fighting, but in enduring and protecting others under extreme risk. First-hand accounts also bring us closer to moments of unexpected humanity amidst horror. A medic's letter might describe laughter shared over a meager meal, or a pilot's journal entry might note a brief moment of awe at a sunrise over the ocean. These glimpses reveal the resilience of the human spirit, how soldiers found moments of hope and normalcy even when surrounded by chaos. Through letters, diaries, and personal stories, we gain a deeper appreciation for the Pacific War, not just as a series of battles, but as a human experience. These documents remind us that heroism is often quiet, complex, and deeply personal. They preserve the voices of those who risked everything, ensuring that we remember not only their actions, but also their thoughts, fears, and hopes. But understanding these personal experiences also illuminates another critical aspect of heroism: the psychological toll. Facing impossible odds leaves marks that endure long after the battlefield is silent. What happened next would explore the mental and emotional cost of the Pacific War and the resilience required to survive it. The psychological toll of facing impossible odds war is not only fought on land, in the sea, or in the sky. It is fought in the mind. The Pacific War tested the psychological endurance of soldiers in ways that were as relentless as enemy fire. Facing disease, starvation, isolation, and the constant threat of death, men and women endured stressors that would have broken many, yet some found a way to persevere. Private Jack Thompson, who famously held the ridge at Guadalcanal, later described nights filled with vivid nightmares, the echo of gunfire, the cries of fallen comrades, and the fear of being alone. Sleep was scarce, and when it came, it was haunted. This psychological strain was compounded by the constant unpredictability of the environment. Dense jungles, volcanic islands, and sweltering heat created a battlefield where danger could appear anywhere at any moment. Even pilots like Lieutenant Commander Tom Harrison experienced mental exhaustion. In the skies over Midway, split-second decisions determined life or death, and the weight of responsibility for their squadron survival was enormous. Harrison admitted that adrenaline carried him through combat, but after returning to base, he grappled with anxiety, intrusive memories, and sleepless nights, a pattern mirrored by countless airmen who faced similar high-stakes situations daily. Medics, such as Corporal James Lawson, bore another form of psychological burden, running toward the wounded, witnessing severe injuries and death, and knowing that a single mistake could cost lives left lasting mental scars. Many medics developed what we now recognize as PTSD, though at the time, they lacked the language or support to process these experiences fully. Their courage was intertwined with the mental resilience required to face trauma repeatedly. The psychological toll extended beyond the battlefield. Isolation, separation from loved ones, and the sheer scale of destruction weighed heavily on soldiers. Letters and diaries often reveal moments of doubt, fear, and despair, yet they also reveal determination and hope. These documents highlight the duality of war, the constant presence of fear and the simultaneous rise of extraordinary courage. Even in extreme conditions, soldiers found ways to cope. Humor, camaraderie, and small routines offered temporary relief. Scouts like William Carter relied on familiarity with terrain and careful planning to manage stress in hostile jungles. Sailors like Samuel Harris focused on practical problem solving aboard torpedoed ships to channel fear into action. These coping mechanisms were not weaknesses. They were essential tools for survival, showing that psychological resilience was as critical as physical bravery. The lessons of the Pacific War extend beyond military history. They reveal the human capacity to endure extreme stress, to act decisively under pressure, and to maintain moral courage when confronted with unimaginable adversity. Heroism, therefore, is not just about bold actions, but about sustaining purpose and humanity in the face of relentless psychological challenges. Yet, amid the mental toll, the Pacific War also offered lessons in leadership, bravery, and sacrifice that endure today. The experiences of these heroes shaped strategies, inspired fellow soldiers, and defined the moral fabric of combat. What happened next would draw together these lessons, exploring the broader principles of heroism and resilience that the Pacific War exemplified. Lessons in leadership, bravery, and sacrifice. The Pacific War was more than a series of battles. It was a masterclass in leadership, bravery, and sacrifice. Across islands, jungles, and open seas, soldiers, sailors, and airmen demonstrated qualities that continue to inspire generations today. Each story, whether of a Marine standing alone at Guadalcanal, a pilot diving into enemy fleets over Midway, or a medic refusing to leave the wounded, offers timeless lessons about courage, decision-making, and moral responsibility. Leadership in the Pacific War often meant making impossible choices under extreme pressure. Sergeant Daniel Reynolds on Iwo Jima led his men not by shouting orders, but by setting an example, running into danger, organizing rescues, and making quick tactical decisions that saved lives. Leadership was also about trust. Trusting your team to follow, trusting yourself to act decisively, and maintaining morale even in the face of staggering odds. Leaders who embodied these traits turned ordinary soldiers into extraordinary units capable of achieving what seemed impossible. Bravery in the Pacific War was not limited to dramatic acts of combat. It included quiet endurance, moral courage, and the willingness to act for others. Corporal James Lawson's relentless dedication to the wounded, for example, was as heroic as any aerial attack or naval engagement. Bravery often meant choosing to face fear rather than flee, to protect life rather than simply survive. It was a mindset that transformed ordinary men into heroes capable of extraordinary feats. Sacrifice was the constant companion of heroism. Soldiers gave their lives, health, and peace of mind in service to their comrades and country. Lieutenant Commander Tom Harrison risked death to strike decisive blows at Midway, knowing the odds of survival were slim. Coast watchers like Eric Matthews endured isolation, disease, and enemy pursuit to provide critical intelligence that saved countless lives. These sacrifices highlight that heroism often comes at a personal cost, yet they were made willingly, guided by purpose and loyalty. The Pacific War also teaches us the power of resilience. Scouts like William Carter navigated jungles teeming with danger. Pilots endured hours of lethal aerial combat, and sailors like Samuel Harris fought to save their ships from destruction. Each of these acts demonstrates that courage is not a single moment, but a sustained effort, an ability to persist despite fear, fatigue, and overwhelming odds. Finally, the lessons of the Pacific War extend beyond the military sphere. They remind us that leadership requires responsibility, bravery requires moral clarity, and sacrifice demands empathy and selflessness. These are lessons for anyone facing adversity, whether on a battlefield or in everyday life. The stories of the Pacific heroes offer a blueprint for courage under pressure, resilience in the face of adversity, and commitment to a cause greater than oneself. But as the war came to an end, the challenge shifted from surviving the battlefield to preserving memory. The final and perhaps most important lesson of all: Remembering these human stories ensures that heroism, sacrifice, and courage are not forgotten, even as time moves on. What happened next would bring us to the final reflections of the Pacific War, honoring the human spirit and the legacies left by those who faced impossible odds. Conclusion. Remembering the Pacific War's human stories. The Pacific War was a conflict of unprecedented scale, testing the limits of human courage, endurance, and resilience. Across oceans, islands, and jungles, ordinary men and women faced extraordinary circumstances. From the Marines standing alone at Guadalcanal to the medics risking everything to save the wounded, each story illustrates the profound complexity of heroism. Remembering the Pacific War is about more than recounting victories or losses. It is about honoring the human experience, the fear, the hope, the perseverance, and the moral courage that defined this conflict. Letters, diaries, and first-hand accounts reveal moments of personal triumph, quiet heroism, and resilience in the face of unimaginable adversity. They remind us that the true cost of war is not measured solely in territory gained or ships sunk, but in the lives touched, the sacrifices made, and the courage displayed under impossible odds. The stories of unsung heroes, coast watchers, scouts, sailors, medics, and civilians underscore a vital lesson. Heroism exists in many forms. It can be loud and celebrated or quiet and invisible. Yet every act contributes to the larger narrative of survival and victory. These are the human threads that weave together the epic tapestry of the Pacific War. As we reflect on the courage of heroes like Jack Thompson, Tom Harrison, Daniel Reynolds, Eric Matthews, Samuel Harris, James Lawson, William Carter, and Robert Henderson, we are reminded that bravery is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. Each faced impossible odds, yet through determination, skill, and compassion, they altered the course of history and inspired generations to come. The Pacific War also teaches us lessons beyond the battlefield. The importance of resilience, the value of leadership, the necessity of moral courage, and the enduring impact of selflessness. It shows that even in the darkest moments, human beings are capable of extraordinary courage and profound humanity. Remembering these stories is not just an act of honoring the past. It is a way to carry forward the lessons of courage, sacrifice, and hope into our own lives. These heroes faced the unimaginable, and yet they acted. Their legacies endure, reminding us that even in the face of impossible odds, courage and humanity can prevail. The Pacific War may have ended decades ago, but the human stories, the fear, the bravery, the sacrifices remain timeless. By remembering them, we ensure that the heroes of the Pacific War live on, not just as names in history books, but as enduring symbols of the best of humanity in the worst of circumstances. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the Pacific War and for honoring the courage of those who faced impossible odds. From Marines and pilots to medics, scouts, and unsung heroes, their bravery shaped history and reminds us of the human spirit's resilience. If you were inspired by these stories, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new history story. Comment below and tell us which hero's story moved you the most. We love hearing your thoughts. And remember, history isn't just about dates and battles. It's about the people who lived it, the choices they made, and the courage they carried in their hearts. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep honoring the heroes of history.